You rummage through your gym bag in frantic search to find them. You lose them more often than you can imagine, and you wouldn't dare slipping on your tennis shoes without placing them between your delicate feet and those ragged sneakers. What is this, you ask? A pair of reliable socks. According to Nancy F., who wrote A Brief History on Socks on crofters.org in 1997, she says that no article of clothing has been more taken for granted than the humble sock, yet throughout history, language, and customs, it seems to have been an important part of everyday life. To help me more understand the purpose of socks, today I will first inform you on a brief history of socks, then I will go over the different purposes of socks, and finally I will close with the variety of socks. This brings me to my first point, which is the history of the origin of socks. The first time humans decided to put cloth around their feet is unknown because, you can't really but according to Nancy F. again, the first actual written reference to some form of sock appears to be before the 1st century AD. And this was different than what we would consider socks. It was either leather or cloth wrapped around a foot, and they were worn by elderly men and women, and it was seen as a sign of weakness. But towards the end of the 1st century AD, men started wearing them as a sign of wealth. Also during the 1st century AD, the udu was created, and that was a first slipper, and it was slipped on rather than wrapped, which is very similar to how we slip on our socks today. At around the 16th century, stockings were created and they were knitted, which is how we have our socks made today. Now that you have a brief understanding of where socks comes from, this brings me to my second point, which is the purpose of socks. There are many different purposes of socks. There are fun purposes, and then there are logistical purposes. Some of the logistical purposes include feet remain protected from dust and moisture, and they remain clean. You remain 50% safer from cold just by wearing socks in the winter, and socks stop your shoes from stinking up and rotting. They absorb sweat from the feet. There are also many fun purposes to socks as well. They have fun colors and fun patterns, and if you're bored, you can also make nice sock puppets out of them. Now that I've gone over the brief history of the purposes of socks, I will now go into my last point, which is the different types of socks. Buying socks may appear to be simple, but with so many options, it seems overwhelming. We need to match the needs of the individual wearers to their activities. PhD Joyce Smith of Ohio State University wrote an article in 2001 called Selecting Socks. She broke it down into 4 different categories that you need to consider when selecting your sock. She broke it down into the fiber content, the construction, the finishes, and the types. The fiber content and the different fibers that go into socks are important for many different reasons, and some of the common fibers that are used in socks are cotton, wool, nylon, acrylic, polyester, spandex. And some of you may have heard of a natural cotton blend, and that is in a lot of the socks that we wear today, and that consists of 60% of cotton, and the other 40% has either nylon or spandex. And the construction of a sock is important to consider for comfort and purpose. I don't know if you guys can see this, but I broke it down into 2 categories. The stockinette stitch is used on the foot area, and you can see that it stays the same throughout the entire sock. And then the rib stitch, it's raised and then lowered, and that's used in the leg area, and it leaves availability for stretchiness and to go back to shape. And finishes are not as well known, but can serve purposes to specific needs of an individual. An anti-static finish is used on synthetic fibers, which is usually used as like a dress sock, so it helps so your pants don't stick to your socks. And then an odor and bacteria resistance is used for helping with stench of the sock. And finally, when you're choosing a pair of socks, there are many different types you need to consider. There is the knee-length sport sock, the crew sock, the anklet, and the difference between the crew and the anklet is that the anklet is a little shorter than the crew, but they're very similar. And then my personal favorite is the quarter top, and I like this one because you can have a fun pattern and you can still hide it in your sneaker. So now that I have given you this information about the importance of socks, I would like to close by saying, we've gone over the history of the origin of socks, the many purposes of socks, and finally I've helped you consider the best sock for you. I hope you have a better understanding of my personal favorite article of clothing. And I hope that the next time you pull on a pair of socks, you just remember and be appreciative of what they do for you.